She lost everything for helping a stranger in the storm. Fired. Humiliated. Cast aside like she was nothing. But the old man she saved that rainy night? He was watching. And when he walked back into her life, the manager who destroyed her would face a reckoning he never saw coming. Before we dive into this incredible true story of kindness and justice, I need just 3 seconds of your time. Hit that subscribe button right now. Your support keeps stories like this alive, and it means the world to me. Now let's begin. The rain came down like anger that night. Elise Moreau gripped the steering wheel of her old Renault, knuckles white, eyes straining through the windshield. The wipers scraped back and forth, fast, frantic, but they couldn't keep up. Water poured across the glass in sheets, blurring the narrow country road into nothing but darkness and streaks of light. She was exhausted, bone-tired, the kind of tired that settles deep in your chest and makes every breath feel heavy. Café Laurent had closed late again. Her feet ached from 10 hours of running between tables. Her uniform still smelled like burnt coffee and dish soap. All she wanted was to get home, peel off her shoes, and collapse into silence. But then she saw it. A car. A black Mercedes parked crooked on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly through the storm like a dying heartbeat. The hood was up. Steam rose from the engine in thin, ghostly wisps, disappearing into the rain. And standing beside it, drenched, trembling, alone, was an old man. Elise slowed down. Her headlights caught him fully now. He wore a fine coat, completely soaked through. No umbrella. No help. Just an elderly gentleman with silver hair plastered to his forehead, one hand gripping the fender for balance, the other clutching a phone that clearly had no signal out here. She should keep driving. It was late. Dangerous. A woman alone on an empty road in the middle of a storm. This was exactly the kind of situation people warned you about. But she saw the way his shoulders shook. The way his fingers fumbled with the phone, desperate, hopeless. The way he stood there, not moving, just stuck. Elise sighed. She pulled over. The sound of rain hammered louder as she rolled down her window halfway. Cold air and the smell of wet asphalt rushed in. "Monsieur," she called out. "Are you all right?" The old man turned, startled. He squinted through the rain, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "My car," he said, voice hoarse and shaking. "It's dead. No one is answering. I think I'm lost." Elise leaned over and unlocked the passenger door. "You'll freeze out there. Get in before you drown." He hesitated, stared at her through the rain. A stranger. A woman he didn't know, offering help in the middle of nowhere. Then he nodded. He opened the door and slid inside, dripping water all over the worn seat. The heater in Elise's car barely worked, but she cranked it up anyway. The weak hum filled the silence as she pulled back onto the road, driving slowly through the storm. "You didn't have to stop," the man said quietly. Elise shrugged. Couldn't just leave someone's grandfather melting in the rain. He smiled faintly at that. A tired, grateful smile. He introduced himself as Philippe Beaumont. Said he'd been driving back from a business meeting outside Lyon. The storm caught him halfway, and his car gave up in the worst possible place. Elise listened but didn't ask too many questions. She just drove. The rain drummed steadily on the roof. The headlights swept over dark trees and empty fields. It felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. 20 minutes later, she pulled up in front of her building, a narrow, gray apartment block in Vaux-en-Velin, the working-class edge of the city. Streetlights flickered weakly. The paint on the walls was peeling. But it was home. Inside her tiny studio, she handed Philippe a towel and made him a cup of hot tea. The radiator clicked and hissed in the corner, barely warming the room. She gave him her only blanket, a faded blue one her grandmother had made years ago. "Please," he protested. "You don't have to." "I insist," Elise said firmly. She smiled softly. "You need it more than I do tonight." Philippe looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders. He fell asleep on her couch within minutes, exhausted and finally safe. Elise sat by the window, watching the rain slow to a drizzle. Her reflection looked back at her in the glass, tired, worn, but peaceful. She had done the right thing. Before dawn, she left for work. The couch was empty when she came out of the bathroom. The blanket was folded neatly on the armrest. And resting on the small table beside it was a handwritten note. She picked it up and read, "Merci pour votre humanité. You saw me as a person, nothing more, nothing less. PB." Elise smiled faintly. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. Then she stepped out into the cold, gray morning, unaware that the man she'd saved would walk back into her life very soon. And when he did, everything would change. The morning came cold and unforgiving. Elise rushed through the doors of Café Laurent 12 minutes late, her hair still damp from the rain, her breath coming in short gasps. She'd run the last 3 blocks uphill, her shoes slipping on wet cobblestones, her heart pounding in her chest. The café was already packed. The smell of fresh croissants and strong espresso filled the air. Dishes clattered in the kitchen. Voices hummed in conversation. And standing behind the counter, arms crossed, face twisted in irritation, was Luc Fontaine, the manager. Luc was a man who wore his authority like a weapon. Mid-40s, slicked back hair, expensive watch, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He ruled Café Laurent with cruelty disguised as professionalism. Everyone feared him. No one challenged him. And right now, his eyes were locked on Elise. "Moreau," he said loudly, cutting through the noise. His voice dripped with contempt. "You think time bends for you?" Elise froze. Every head in the café turned toward her. Customers mid-sip. Waitstaff mid-step. Even the young cook at the grill stopped moving. "I'm sorry, Monsieur Fontaine," she said quietly, trying to catch her breath. "There was an emergency. An elderly man was stranded in the storm last night, and I save it," Luc snapped, slamming a receipt pad onto the counter. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "We have a packed morning. The owner is visiting today for the first time in years. And you stroll in like you're doing us a favor." Elise's stomach dropped. "Please, I can explain." "Explain what?" Luc stepped closer, his voice rising, making sure everyone could hear. "That you think good deeds are more important than your job? That helping strangers pays your rent?" A few customers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others watched in silence, unsure whether to intervene. Elise tried again, her voice steady but pleading. "Monsieur Fontaine, I've worked here for 4 years. You know I'm never late." This was different. The man had no one. I couldn't just leave him. "I don't care," Luc interrupted coldly. He turned to the room, raising his voice even louder. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. If you want to play sane on company time, you can join her outside." A cruel smile spread across his face as he turned back to Elise. "You're done. Hand over your apron." The words hit like a slap. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Even the espresso machine seemed to stop hissing. Elise stood there, frozen, her hands trembling. Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred for just a second, but she blinked it away. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Slowly, with as much dignity as she could gather, she untied her apron. Her fingers fumbled with the knot, but she got it loose. She folded it carefully, smoothed it once, and placed it gently on the counter. She didn't say a word. She didn't beg. She just turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, a woman in the corner booth whispered to her friend, "That poor girl. She's the kindest one here." But no one stood up. No one spoke louder. No one defended her. Elise pushed open the door. The bell above it chimed softly, mockingly, as she stepped out into the drizzle. The rain had softened since last night, but somehow it stung worse. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and kept walking, head down, heart breaking. Behind her, inside the café, Luc straightened his tie and smirked. He turned to the staff, voice smooth and satisfied. "Perfect timing," he muttered. "The owner's finally coming. Last thing I need is charity cases making this place look unprofessional." The staff returned to work in silence, avoiding his eyes. But outside, across the street, something else was happening. A black Mercedes rolled slowly past the café. Its tinted windows were up, but one of them lowered just slightly, just enough. Inside, Philippe Beaumont sat in the back seat, his face calm but unreadable. He watched Elise walk away, shoulders hunched against the rain, alone and defeated. On the passenger seat beside him lay the note she had left him that morning. He picked it up, read it again, and his jaw tightened. He looked back at the café, at the golden sign above the door, at the people inside, laughing and eating, unaware of what had just happened. Philippe adjusted his tie. His driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Monsieur Beaumont?" Philippe didn't answer right away. He stared at the café for another long moment. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "So this is where she works." His eyes darkened with something resolute. Something final. "Take me home, Laurent. I'll be back tomorrow." The car pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the misty streets of Lyon. And as Elise walked alone through the rain, soaked and jobless, She had no idea that the stranger she saved was watching, that he knew exactly what had been done to her, and that tomorrow, when he returned, everything Luc Fontaine had built on cruelty would come crashing down. The next day, Café Laurent buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread fast. The owner, the mysterious, elusive Philippe Beaumont, was coming. For the first time in over 5 years, he would walk through those doors. No one had ever met him. Some thought he was a myth. Others whispered he was a reclusive businessman who owned half of Lion. Luc Fontaine was a wreck beneath his polished exterior. He'd been up since dawn, barking orders, straightening chairs, wiping down tables that were already spotless. His shirt was pressed. His cologne was strong. His smile was rehearsed. This was his moment, his chance to prove himself indispensable. At exactly 12:30, the door opened. The bell chimed, and Philippe Beaumont stepped inside. The room fell silent. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored coat and polished shoes. His presence was quiet but commanding, the kind that made people stand straighter without knowing why. Every eye in the cafe turned toward him. Luc rushed forward, hand extended, smile wide and fake. "Monsieur Beaumont," he gushed. "What an honor, sir. Welcome. Everything is running perfectly, clean, efficient, professional, just as you'd want it." Philippe didn't shake his hand. He simply nodded, his sharp eyes sweeping across the room. He studied the booths, the counter, the staff frozen mid-task like statues. Then his gaze stopped. On the empty corner near the window. The spot where Elise used to work. His jaw tightened slightly. "Where is Elise Moreau?" Philippe asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Luc blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, sir." "Elise Moreau," Philippe repeated slowly. "The waitress who worked here yesterday morning." Luc forced a laugh, waving his hand dismissively. "Oh, her. I'm afraid I had to let her go, monsieur. She was unreliable. Always late. Poor work ethic. Not the kind of image you'd want representing your business." The silence that followed was suffocating. Philippe turned toward the young cook standing nervously by the grill. "Is that true?" Philippe asked him directly. The cook swallowed hard. He glanced at Luc, then back at Philippe. "No, sir," he said quietly. "Elise was the best we had. She was kind to everyone. Never complained. Never caused trouble." Luc's smile faltered. "People exaggerate, sir. I run a tight ship here. Standards must be." "You fired her this morning?" Philippe interrupted, his voice colder now. "Yes, sir. For cause." Philippe nodded slowly. Then he said, voice like iron, "Call her back. Immediately." The color drained from Luc's face. "Sir, I don't think that's—" "I wasn't asking." The room seemed to hold its breath. 10 minutes later, the bell chimed again. Elise stepped through the door, confused and uncertain. She was still wearing the same wrinkled uniform from yesterday. Her eyes scanned the room. Customers staring, staff frozen, Luc looking pale and furious. And then she saw him. Philippe. Her breath caught. Philippe's stern expression softened the moment their eyes met. He walked toward her slowly, and the entire café seemed to disappear. "Mademoiselle Moreau," he said gently. "2 nights ago, you stopped in the rain for a stranger. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care. You just saw a person who needed help." Whispers rippled through the room. The cook dropped his spatula. A waitress gasped. Philippe continued, his voice steady and warm. "You gave me shelter, warmth, kindness. You treated me like a human being when I had nothing to offer you in return." Elise's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. "So I'm making this official," Philippe said, turning to address the entire café. "Elise Moreau is reinstated. Not as a waitress, but as co-manager of Café Laurent. Effective immediately." The room erupted in gasps. Luc's jaw dropped. "You cannot be serious." "I'm very serious," Philippe said, his voice cutting like a blade. "You wanted to impress me, Monsieur Fontaine. Congratulations. You did, just not the way you hoped." The staff broke into quiet applause. Relief washed over their faces. Elise stood speechless, tears streaming down her cheeks. Philippe smiled faintly. "You gave me kindness in the rain, mademoiselle. I intend to return it with respect." 6 months later. Café Laurent was unrecognizable. The windows gleamed. The new sign above the door read L'Abri de la Pluie, the rainy shelter. Every seat was filled. Laughter echoed off the walls. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air. Under Elise's quiet, compassionate leadership, the café had become more than a business. It had become a home. But Luc's story had taken a darker turn. Weeks after Philippe's visit, Luc had tried to frame Elise for theft, stealing cash and planting evidence. But Philippe had installed hidden cameras. They caught everything. Luc was arrested, fired, humiliated. Now, on a cold evening, Elise stood outside the cafe, watching the street. Across the road, under the flickering neon light of a car wash, she saw him. Luc Fontaine, scrubbing windshields in a stained uniform, shoulders hunched, face hollow. For a long moment, she just watched. Then she crossed the street. Luc froze when he saw her. His eyes filled with shame and anger. Without a word, Elise handed him a sealed envelope. "What is this?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "Open it when you're ready," she said calmly. She turned and walked away. When Luc finally tore it open, his hands shaking, he found a donation receipt to a homeless charity, made in his name. Beneath it, a handwritten note. "Everyone deserves a second chance. I had mine. E.M." He stood there in the rain, staring at the note, something breaking inside him. Back at L'Abri de la Pluie, Elise flipped the sign from firm to avert. Morning light crept through the windows, reflecting off the polished counter. She tied her apron, smiled softly. The first customer walked in, shaking rain from his coat. "Bonjour," Elise said warmly. "Welcome to L'Abri de la Pluie, where kindness is always on the menu." And as the cafe filled with life once more, the rain outside began to fall, gentle, soft, and full of promise. Kindness costs nothing. But its value? Immeasurable. Elise didn't help Philippe because she knew who he was. She helped him because it was the right thing to do. And in the end, the world gave back what she so freely gave. Remember this. Every small act of compassion creates ripples we may never see. But they're always felt. Always.